Hey everyone, thanks for coming to Onwards with Dr. Danielle. I'm your host, Dr. Danielle Clark. This is Onwards, and we are here for you, providing you healing conversations to get you unstuck. If you're here live, thanks so much. It's Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're catching the replay, that's okay. It's the same good information and the same good energy. I'm a business professor, psychic medium, intuitive life coach, and so much more. If you want to learn more about me, you can find me at drdanielleclark.com. Today's episode is the power of vulnerability. And you just being here today with me is vulnerable. So congratulations. I personally feel, and my lived experiences have validated this, that vulnerability is really the key to a life well lived. If we are authentic, if we are real, if we are raw, we are living to our soul's beat of the drum, so to speak. And that's what we're really here for, right? It's my belief that we're here to learn and grow and express our true selves, and vulnerability can help us do that. I work with a lot of clients, and I regularly hear about mismatches. My partner isn't for me. My friend group isn't for me. My job isn't for me. And oftentimes, after we layer back the onion, it comes to the client realizing that it takes two to tango. Some of the mismatching they've experienced has actually happened because they haven't worked to bring their true self to relationships. And because of that, you're going to get what you give. So here today, as we talk about the power of vulnerability, being vulnerable can really create that beautiful relationship, whether it's your friends or with your family or a romantic partner, or help you align with community groups or organizations, employers that are best for you. So stay on that. And let me talk a little bit about what I believe vulnerability is and isn't. We hear vulnerability a lot these days. And I still think there's some misconceptions. Vulnerability is not telling everyone your life story. So let me get that right off the bat. You can be a vulnerable person. You can speak your truth when needed. You can put up boundaries when needed. You can honor your likes and dislikes, but that doesn't mean that you need to be this full open book to the world. What being vulnerable means to me is that you are, yes, sometimes taking risks, getting outside of your comfort zone, potentially sharing things about you that might be difficult, but you're honoring your emotions and willing to lean in to create a deep connection with someone. But it should be done in your own timing. It should be done in a process that feels pure and that feels at the right level of disclosure and the right pacing for you. When I think about being vulnerable, it is accepting a little discomfort. Vulnerable isn't necessarily easy. It's accepting some discomfort to honor this right here, even though maybe it might be uncomfortable to your ego to admit something. Maybe, I don't know, that vulnerability statement is that you need help. Maybe that vulnerability statement is that you don't understand something. Whatever that is, it's important to know, yeah, there might be some discomfort, sure. But vulnerability is not you working for other people. There's this balance between being raw and vulnerable to honor what your soul is feeling, to honor what your soul wants to deliver, and you being so open that you're actually serving others and not yourself. So it's really important when I say be vulnerable. It is trying to listen to your heart and decide the potential greatest benefit for you in all as it relates to you taking an action, whether that's saying something, whether that's doing something, whether that's thinking something. But it doesn't necessarily mean being vulnerable is you're high risk all the time. You're just saying yes to everything because you're outside your comfort zone. Not at all. It's all about you. A lot of people will mistake the concept of vulnerability of it needing to be more about the other person. So how can you be more vulnerable, right? How can you be more vulnerable? There's so many different ways. Yes, storytelling is absolutely one way that you can be more vulnerable. Anytime we share about ourselves, our passions, our bloopers, our traumas, it's healing, right? Because we're no longer harboring those secrets, the feeling of shame or the feeling of guilt or the feeling of loneliness. Sharing our story is very powerful. Anytime we share anything, right? Maybe it's a song you've created, maybe it's a piece of art, or maybe it's food that you've baked. Sharing in general is a very vulnerable process, and allowing people into your craft is absolutely one way you can be vulnerable. Another way to be vulnerable is create space for the things that you like, right? So if you don't like going to the museums, but your friend is always pulling you along to the museums every weekend, putting up some boundaries so that way you have some you time. That's vulnerability, right? That's a way that you can be who you want to be. Maybe you prefer spending your weekends reading. Maybe you prefer spending your weekends playing pickleball, like whatever that is. Sometimes being vulnerable isn't necessarily sharing something. It's about creating a boundary and speaking your truth. Speaking your truth is incredibly important. Sometimes it's not directly related to the throat chakra. Sometimes it's all about just honoring how you're feeling. What color do you want to wear today? Not necessarily wearing what you think other people want you to wear, right? That kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. It's like, be careful. It's more about like, oh, I'm going to take this fashion risk because I want to experience a new color. I want to experience a new trend. So when I think vulnerability, the word I is really important. And what I've done is I actually put together a list of 10 words that I feel really highlights what vulnerability is. Because again, I find that there's a lot of debunking that needs to happen about what vulnerability is and isn't. So I encourage you, grab a pen and paper. And as I say these words, I want you to authentically consider, how are you in this category? Do you find that this comes with some level of ease? Do you find that you are regularly working on honoring this side of you and developing this side of you? Or does me even saying the word just like close you off or get your skin itchy, like you know it's not for you? Because these 10 words are really going to help you better understand what vulnerability is and work to make yourself more vulnerable. So that way you can receive all the benefits of vulnerability. And we're going to talk more about that later. So here's your list. Number 1 is openness. And so what comes to mind? Openness. Are you open? Is that a piece of you? Do you actively work on it? Does it come naturally? Maybe you could ponder, when was the last time you were open? And again, the replay is going to be available. If we go too fast, feel free to watch the recording on my YouTube channel and pause it and go down the list. So the next one is transparency. Are you a transparent person? What's an example? What's an example of a time where you weren't as transparent as you could have been? And how do you feel that? Do you feel when you weren't as transparent as you could have been? Did you feel it in your chest? Did you feel it in your stomach? That's really important too, is to understand how your body's talking to you. What about fragile? How often do you feel fragile? How often do you allow yourself to experience fragility? How often do you tell someone that's how you're feeling? Next word's trust. Do you trust yourself? Do you trust yourself when you go out? Do you trust yourself to speak the truth? Trust. Next word, emotional. Emotional. What feelings do you consider when I say emotional? How do you think being emotional connects to vulnerability? Where could you improve on experiencing your emotions? Leaning into the good emotions and the hard emotions, expressing your emotions. Next word, exposure. How are you exposed? How do you let yourself become exposed? Or do you hide? What does that look like for you? Rawness. When are you raw? How does it feel when you're raw? Who do you look up to that you would describe as having a rawness to them? And what might you learn from them? Courage. Courage. What areas of you in your life are you most courageous? Where do you show courage? Where could you show more courage? Is it in your friend group? Is it at work? Is it within your family? Is it within your projects and your creative hobbies? Use this word a lot already. We're at number 9, authenticity. How are you authentic? Who are you? What makes you you? What makes you authentically you? And that last one I'll have you consider is receptive. How are your active listening skills? How are you at getting pieces of new information and getting curious about them? And so that's just a little taste of 10 words that I feel describes vulnerability and can really help us lean into that essence of vulnerability. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the potential of vulnerability. And I'm going to talk about it from a spiritual potential of vulnerability, because I believe that when we are vulnerable, everything that we are here to experience comes alive and comes towards us. It's my belief that one of the main areas we're here to work on is our ego. And our ego self is typically here, and it has some fear. It has some survival mechanisms. It has a need to control. And if we don't know how to appreciate our ego, turn our ego off, it can close down our heart and it can close down our soul. And of course, that's not what we're here to do, right? And so when we're vulnerable, we have the ability to transcend our ego. And what's great about vulnerability is it's a release. It is a release. When we are in our truth, when we are authentic, when we are raw, when we are visible, it's a release. There is an energetic release happening. So that way, the issues of a situation don't stick on us. It's my belief that a lot of the chronic health issues that are experienced, especially here in the States, are because of things like guilt, grief, shame that aren't processed effectively. For emotions and traumas to be processed effectively, there needs to be a release. And that release can be vulnerability. How can you show up for yourself? How can you show up for your soul? Speak your truth, live your life, so that way your energy and your body, mind, body, and soul are operating at full potential. Multiple studies have told us that the number one regret of those dying is that they did not live a life for them. They did not live an authentic life. Think about that. Let that sink in. The number one reason there is regret in those who are transitioning from here to heaven is that they weren't vulnerable. This is so important, this conversation we're having today. And again, we're going to go back to that word discomfort, because oftentimes we're not vulnerable because it's easier to numb ourselves. It's easier to follow the crowd. It's easier to pretend that we think a certain way or don't think a certain way. And we need to remember energetically that that is not best for us. Now, in the moment, taking a risk, getting outside our comfort zone, being vulnerable, right? Which might mean that we are separate from the crowd, that we are saying something or doing something for the first time. That doesn't mean this doesn't come easy. There could be a lot of disruption, a lot of sour faces towards you, or even angry people if they don't know who this person is all of a sudden, right? You've never said that before, right? There's absolutely going to be worry inside of you. What are people going to think? How is this going to work? But the discomfort is worth it. And here's why. And here's what a lot of people don't realize. We're not here to never experience pain, right? We are here to experience the dark and the light, right? That's why we have sun and moon. We are here to have a balanced life. We need some of the pain. We need some of the discomfort. But it's going to be a healthy discomfort and much more short-lived, because we're giving ourselves that cycle time, that time to honor ourselves and release. And so even though that release might come with some anxiety, it might come with some consequences, the purity and the love and the joy from our soul, and all of those supporting us in spirit, our deceased loved ones, our angels, our ancestors, God directly, are just going to be more light to us. When we honor our truth on that subject, it also helps us to better connect with the other side. When we are a clear channel, when we are honoring our soul, it becomes easier for us to tap into our intuition. Things like guilt and feeling stuck and feeling unsure and feeling unseen, these are all low vibing emotions. And what we need to be able to really effectively communicate with spirit is we need to rise above the muck. And they come down and they meet us in the middle. And then we can get the breadcrumbs a little easier, the signs and synchronicities. They can use our fill in the blank, our sense of smell, our sense of hearing, our sense of sight, our clairs is what I call them, right? And so they can work with us, which is really neat too, because by being vulnerable, we become clearer channels which means we are now open to greater information that can best serve us in our journey. So, so important for us. So yes, vulnerability is absolutely going to be some discomfort and risks, but it's worth it. And, you know, the number one challenge I hear from clients these days, and I'm sure you can resonate, is people are lonely. Are you lonely? People are lonely. People feel as though people don't understand them. People aren't wanting to communicate anymore. The world seems disorienting. And the answer to that is vulnerability, right? Speak your truth. If you're lonely, tell someone else you're lonely. Because what that does is that opens up a potential for someone to say, me too. Me too. Your vulnerability can be a gift. Think about this. It's also not just an honoring for yourself, but if you have the courage, right? We used that word earlier. If you have the courage to be vulnerable and to tell someone, I'm hurting, I'm lonely, it creates a sacred space for them to say, me too. And think about the power in that. Think about now we have two souls who have stated they're lonely. Think about the healing potential, right? Think about the ways in which now there's this deep understanding that these two souls can come together and ensure together they rise above and create that community and create those connection points where loneliness is not going to be a thing anymore. It's the same thing about asking for help. I talk to so many people and they feel blocked, you know, they're struggling. Maybe they need advice, maybe they need financial support. Maybe they just need what I consider a simple favor, but they won't ask for help. And my response is always very similar. And it's, hey, what if you asking for help is a gift to them? What if they've been feeling a lack of purpose lately? What if they've been feeling a lack of connection? What if this opens a door to their heart opening up a little bit, right? And that's how we need to think as it relates to being vulnerable. It is absolutely for us, and it's also for others. Like together we rise, together our honesty, our authenticity can help make this really crazy yet beautiful thing called being human make a little more sense, because a lot of us are walking around and we're feeling different and we're feeling disconnected. And the truth is, that's not the truth. It's just that we're not speaking our truth, so we feel very disconnected. Here on Onwards is a good example of my vulnerability journey. Every week I show up on camera. It's not easy for me sometimes. Most times, actually, I have to work on my ego. My ego wants me to be perfect, to not say any ums or ahs, or to hit everything just right. My ego wants to critique every episode. And so it's me being vulnerable. I talk about some really vulnerable stuff too. A few weeks ago, if you saw, I was talking about my journey with complex PTSD. I spent a half hour with my co-host, Kate, talking about my mental health and the way that I navigate my mental health. And I want you to know it's not easy for me. That's me being vulnerable. Just because I do it doesn't mean that there's no discomfort, but I choose to do it for exactly the reasons I've pinpointed. One, since I've started my blog Onwards and I've started this show Onwards, I am happier and healthier than ever. And I attribute it to that energy release that I mentioned earlier. I'm not carrying things inside of me. If something uncomfortable happened in my life, I talk about it or I write about it. I let it go. I let it go. These are my release channels. And I realized that, sure, there's a potential of judgment by me sharing stories. There's a potential of discomfort by me being here. But I realized the payoff. If I can have these vulnerable conversations weekly, it might spark someone else to do the same. It might spark someone to lean in a little differently or behave in a way that they've been afraid to, whether it's talking about their mental health or speaking their truth. So I find that important too. I want you to know, even though I'm here talking about the power of vulnerability, know it's something I work for. I work for it. This is not going to come easy. Anybody who tells you it's easy, I don't know. It hasn't been my experience. And so that's okay. Things don't need to be easy. In fact, most of the things that we're most proud of, most of the things that we get the most reward out of are the things that we put some grit and tough love in, right? Okay. I know this was a lot. I know this was a lot. Thank you for coming to this space and for investing time in considering how you can be more vulnerable, because again, I believe this is the secret sauce to a life well lived. If you can be vulnerable, you're not going to have those regrets towards the end of life, and you're just going to be a bright light, and people are going to be matched to you. Remember that, right? The things that you like, people will find you. The way that you're expressing yourself, people will get you, the right people. And those who don't, that's okay too. Send me a note. I would love to hear from you. How are you being vulnerable? How did this episode help your vulnerability journey? Don't forget, if I can ever help you, I do offer one-on-ones. So if you go to drdanielleclark.com and you head over to my Work With Me page, you can schedule a one-on-one. We could do a psychic mediumship call, and I can help you better understand maybe some blocked areas, some areas that are working really well for you, and how we can strengthen those, and just give you a higher perspective from spirit and loved ones to help you on your amazing journey. I am sending love. I am sending light. And remember, it is the cracks in your heart that let the light shine through. You take care. Bye.